Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come. The one and only Season 12 Aatrox guide has finally arrived. So lean back, get yourself a drink, and enjoy the show. If you don't already know who I am, then let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Nail, I've been playing Aatrox in EU West ever since he was reworked back in late Season 8, and I have collected over 2.5 million mastery points on the champion and have over 4,000 games worth of experience. Most of those games being played in High MMR Grandmaster and Challenger Elo. My ranked accomplishments so far have been peaking Grandmaster in Season 10, peaking around 1 KLP Challenger in Season 11, and peaking around 1 KLP Challenger again in Season 12. I am one of the few, if not the only player in EU West that has shown how strong Aatrox can be in High Elo and how to climb with him consistently. In this video I'm going to give you guys a little insight into my thought process and gameplay. So let's get started. For summoners you simply always want to go Flash and Ignite. Riot has completely destroyed Teleport and everything that made it useful in solo queue. So unless you want to become a world famous pro player and play super boring safe macro, you don't need it and it will slow you down by a lot. You also could technically run stuff like Barrier or Exhaust. I don't really do it, but it might be useful versus some high burst champions, so that's your choice to make. Some people have asked me about Ghost on Aatrox, and I think that's not the smartest thing to do, since your ultimate literally is a mini Ghost anyways, and the spell would just be overkill in a teamfight. So long story short, Flash and Ignite are very good. Now that we got the summoners down, let's get straight to the runes. In past seasons, Aatrox used to switch up his runes quite a bit, but not in Season 12. Conqueror is going to be your main option in unironically 100% of your games, and you of course want to follow up with the Grohl Triumph. Some people think that Conqueror is useless because the healing is always so low, but you need to know that we take Conqueror for the damage, not the healing. The healing is just a little bonus on top of that. Now once we get to the legends, we do have some choices to make. Legend Alacrity provides Aatrox with great scaling attack speed. This helps him execute his combo smoother and also makes last hitting and farming under turret a bit easier. Legend Tenacity on the other hand is also a very great rune for obvious reasons, since Aatrox was always a big fan of reducing oppressive abilities. Legend Bloodline is absolutely terrible, and if you take it I will literally cry myself to sleep, so do me a favor and forget about that rune. Before I explain when to choose what legend rune, let's quickly run down the rest of his options. As the final precision rune, you want to take Last Stand, since it is the most effective and synergizing rune for Aatrox, and it also helps him with that sweet 0 to 100 healing burst we all know him for. Your second rune page will also pretty much always be within the resolve tree, where you can choose between 4 options: Second Wind or Bone Plating, and Revitalize or Unflinching. I was never impressed with Conditioning, since Aatrox needs some support from the runes in his otherwise weaker early game. Overgrowth is also just a very lackluster rune, and the HP you would get in an average game really is not significant. For the mini runes you always want to get double Adaptive Force and Armor or Magic Resist depending on the enemy laner. Now let's talk about what rune combination you should take. The most classic rune combination in my opinion is Legend Tenacity, Second Wind and Revitalize. I am pretty sure you can run this rune page on autopilot and be successful pretty much 95% of the time, but if you want to get some small advantages over the enemy comp before the game even begins, then you should probably look to switch it up a bit more. Choosing between Second Wind or Bone Plating depends on your top lane matchup knowledge. Second Wind mostly helps against poke damage, while Bone Plating helps with the more all-in type of traits. For example, some popular top lane champions that use poke are Gnar, Urgot, Mundo, Cho'Gath, Akali, Gangplank, Jace, Malphite, Ornn, Poppy, Vayne, or pretty much any other ranged champion. Top laners that trade in a more all-in type of way could be something like Camille, Jax, Kled, Mordekaiser, Renekton, Riven, Tryndamere, Garen, Wukong, Pantheon and Zed. There are also some niche champions like Fiora, Darius, Yasuo Yone, Gwen and Illaoi, where both runes could work equally well. I always tell my viewers to choose whatever they prefer, since it doesn't make a huge difference versus these type of champions. Next up is Aatrox's build. As starting items you always want to choose between Doran's Blade or Doran's Shield. If you play versus one of the already mentioned all-in type of matchups, you should go Doran's Blade in order to get extra power in those important one-time trades. If you play versus the poke matchups, you want Doran's Shield in order to regenerate the constant poke thrown at you. Now, if you are a very new Aatrox player and you're still learning the basics, then there is nothing wrong with going Doran's Shield into every lane so you can be a bit more healthy and your mistakes don't get punished too hard. Alright, so next up will probably be the most controversial part of this guide, since my building has drastically changed with the most recent durability patch notes. Don't forget though, this is just my opinion based on my experiences in high elo. If you do not agree with me, then that is totally fine and you're free to build whatever you think is the best. But this is my guide, so I do whatever the fuck I want. So let's get it. I am currently building mostly Eclipse and Divine Sundara into Black Cleaver 2nd, Cyrilda's Grudge 3rd, and 2 optional item choices. Now let me explain why. As I already mentioned, Riot Games has decided to release a durability patch, which basically made everything in the game more tanky overall. And like every other Aatrox main, I just kept building the regular items like God Drinker, Death Stance and Starax Gauge. But after dropping from Challenger and losing about 700 LP, I did notice something, and the thing that I noticed was that Aatrox doesn't deal any damage with the old build. Aatrox's kit has no true damage, no consistent max HP damage, no armor penetration, or anything that could counter this extra durability. On the other hand, champions like Darius, Fiora or Camille have tons and tons of true damage and armor penetration in their kit, so those champions don't really care about the new patch, and they just keep on building whatever they like, because their champions are gonna deal damage regardless, which means they're going to be useful regardless. Aatrox doesn't have that luxury, so in my opinion, you need to adapt and fill this gap with his items, and so far, I've made great experiences. Eclipse and Divine Sundara this patch are absolutely underrated and great items. Before I elaborate on those 2 main items, let's quickly talk about other mythic options and my opinion on them. First off, there is Stridebreaker. I personally really liked old Stridebreaker, but this current version is very lackluster and isn't as strong of an anti-ranged item as it once was. If you find yourself versus 5 ranged champions, you can still maybe make it work, but I personally haven't made the best of experiences with it so far, so I would still stick to Eclipse rather than Stridebreaker versus ranged comps. I already explained why I think God Drinker sucks, so the only last options left would be the more unorthodox mythic items. So that would be stuff like tank, lethality and crit items. People have asked me multiple times if Aatrox can be built with stuff like Frostfire Gauntlet or Sunfire, and I always say the same thing. I don't know why you would buy a tank item on Aatrox. He has no HP scaling ability, he has no resistance scaling, you would literally just buy the item for nothing and maybe it's fun, but if you think logically, it doesn't really make sense to buy those items. On the other hand, what really is fun is to go Duskblade or Prowlers, since it is funny as hell to just one-shot people and then go invisible. But as most of you probably know, those are not the most reliable items on Aatrox, and building them in order to win as many games as possible and to improve at the game isn't really the best strategy. Crit mythics like Kraken Slayer or Immortal Shieldbow just straight up suck, and I don't recommend them, to be honest. I don't really know what to say about those items anyways, so if you want to farm reports from your team, then I guess you can buy them. Now let's get back to the important stuff. Eclipse and Divine. Let's take a quick look at those 2 items. Eclipse gives you 55 attack damage, 18 lethality, 7% omnivamp, a 6% maximum health scaling bonus damage passive that gives you a shield with bonus movement speed, and a 4% armor penetration with 5 movement speed flat mythic passive. Divine Sundara gives you only 40 attack damage, but 20 ability haste, 300 HP, a 6% on-hit maximum health scaling bonus damage passive that also heals you for 3.9% of the target's maximum health, and a 3% armor penetration mythic passive. So unlike God Drinker, these 2 items offer both flat and scaling armor penetration, which will be a great help against these extremely tanky champions this patch. Now you're probably wondering when you should buy what mythic, and that's very easy to answer. If you play versus any champion that wants to deal AD or AP scaling damage, then you go Eclipse, because those champions will have lower resistances, so the extra 18 lethality that Divine does not have will make you burst them down very early into the game. If you are playing versus champions that like to stack health and resistances, then Divine Sundara is the best option, because you can't kill a Scion or Ornn in one combo with Eclipse, especially not in the late game. But with the extra 300 HP, 20 ability haste, and the 3.9% max health healing from Divine, you can spam your abilities and item passive, which will make you out-sustain and shred any annoying 4000 HP tank. I also highly recommend rushing Black Cleaver versus tanks in lane. It's a great way of countering the annoying tankiness, and it's also decent if you are forced to fight versus somebody else. You don't always have to go Divine Sundara just because you're laning versus a tank. If the rest of the enemy team happens to be full squishy, then going Eclipse after rushing Black Cleaver is also completely fine and might sometimes even be the better choice, because Divine shows its real power when you're fighting at least 2 or more high HP targets at the same time. If you decided to build Eclipse in a game, then I always recommend going Black Cleaver as the second item. Black Cleaver is insanely great at complementing Eclipse since it has everything that is missing on Eclipse. You get 350 HP, 30 ability haste, and if that wasn't already enough, you also get 45 attack damage and the 30% armor reduction passive on top of that. As the third item option, I most of the time follow up with Cyrilda's Crutch, which is basically just a huge damage and utility boost. The extra ability haste, armor penetration and slow will make you break through the enemy front or backline. Most people by now would ask me, but Niall, you don't have any resistances yet, aren't you super squishy? And that's the fun part, you're not. The durability patch made Aatrox tanky by default, so building these crazy damage items really doesn't make him a lot squishier. Actually, the opposite is happening. With this build, you sit at around maybe a bit more than 2k HP during the mid game. And if you play a fight well, you can tank up to more than 6000 damage, since you will just be drain tanking it all away. I do have to admit though, that you need some type of courage in your gameplay, and there is not a lot of room for making mistakes and getting caught. But the same thing applied to God Drinker anyways, and now with Eclipse and Divine, you actually deal damage for once and can be the big difference in a team fight if you play it right. Next up are the optional items. Aatrox works really well with the following items: Death Stance, Guardian Angel, Maw of Malmortius, Spirit Visage, Anathema's Chains, Force of Nature, Plated Steel Caps, Ionian Boots and Mercury Treads. As an Aatrox player, you usually don't get to buy your last two items most of the time, but if you do, then Spirit Visage and Death Stance will be your most likely choices. Spirit used to be an extremely bad magic resist item for years now, but with the durability patch, the plus 10 magic resist buff, and the new synergy with the Eclipse Shield and Revitalize, it is a very solid item and probably performs better than Force of Nature in most games. On top of that, if you happen to have an Enchanter on your team, Spirit Visage and Revitalize will also synergize together and boost your teammate's healing and shielding on you. For boots, I mostly go Plated Steel Caps or Mercuries depending on the enemy team of course. Versus AD heavy teams, Plated Steel Caps is gonna do the job, and if you play against a lot of AP or a lot of crowd control, then Mercury Treads could be the best choice. Every now and then you will be able to buy Ionian Boots, but be careful to not sit on them for too long and make sure to switch them if the game goes on for longer, since your items already provide a great amount of ability haste and it does make you a lot more squishy in comparison. The build I just gave you is a very standard one I use quite often and it is very reliable, yet there are games where that will not work, so you do need to adapt your build every once in a while. Force of Nature or Spirit Visage for example are not that good of a magic resist option if the enemy team has an Akali, Diana or another AP damage burst assassin on their team, so Maw of Malmortius would be a much better option there. Most people do not know that Evelynn can execute through Maw of Malmortius, so building it against her is really bad. The best thing to do if the enemy team has an Evelynn is to counter her with Anathema's Chains. You can buy it as a second, third or fourth item, depending on how fed the Evelynn is and how long it takes for her to one-shot people. If the enemy team is full AD, then you obviously do not want to build Magic Resist and should go Death Stance and Guardian Angel. Of course, building the right item also has a lot to do with how good or bad your position is in a game. If you're doing very well, you should not lose your confidence and continue building damage in order to increase the gap between you and the enemy team. Buying defensive items after stomping your enemy just slows you down and gives them time to outscale you and come back through the late game. The same counts for the opposite though. You don't want to continue building full damage when you're 2 levels behind. So skipping the Cyrilda's Crutch third item and choosing a more defensive option like Death Stance, Anathemas or Spirit can be the better choice to make for your team. Aatrox really is a go hard or go home type of champion, so you need to show certain confidence when the confidence is necessary. Alright, so this should be it for the runes and build. Now let's jump right into the gameplay. In this video I will not go over every possible top lane matchup since I don't want this to be 10 hours long. So I'm going to give you some general do's and don'ts when laning with Aatrox. First things first, Aatrox's early lane is extremely weak. His level 1 Q is one of the weakest spells in top lane and you need to be very careful with it since it has a huge 14-second cooldown. Your main job in the early lane is to not get bullied away from the wave and stay within XP range while also trying to last hit every minion you can. Most top laners have a mid-ranged spell that allows them to kill all 3 melee minions at the same time, so I like to match that by using my Q1 on nothing and killing all 3 minions with my Q2. If your enemy laner does not have such an ability like Garen, Malphite or Mundo, then you can go for an offensive Q1 when they try to last hit, and follow up with a Q2 that will hit both them and last hit at least 2 or 3 melee minions. You most likely will not get priority in most of your lanes, so make sure you don't get surprised by an early level 2 engage from your opponent. On the other hand, if you do manage to pull off a successful offensive level 1 Q combo, then you can win over the wave, zone the enemy away from the minions and start to slow push into the enemy tower. It's really important that after you use your Q, you respect the enemy laner until your Q is not on cooldown anymore. Even if you did win over priority, you need to respect if they walk up for last hits and wait for your Q. Aatrox does not win a auto attack battle to the death versus any top laner. A small, well-known tip for a Q is that if you don't use your third Q, the cooldown will already start to count down after you've casted the second Q, and it will be 4 seconds shorter than usual. As Aatrox, you will miss many last hits in the early game, but that is totally okay as long as you stay within the XP range of the minion that is dying. In order to practice staying inside XP range, I highly recommend turning on the XP option in the interface settings so you can see at what range you can still gain experience. Many new Aatrox players make the mistake to walk up to minions they cannot take unpunished and then either get all in killed by the enemy or are forced to burn summoners, risking a potential gank from the enemy jungler. So my biggest advice is to stay safe early and only walk up to the wave when you have your Q up to defend yourself from the enemy laner. Now don't worry, you don't have to play like this forever. Only until level 4, because at level 4 you put a second point into your Q, which instantly turns it from a useless farming tool and defensive spell into a huge offensive threat. At this stage of the lane, you need to look at the enemy champion and figure out what is the spell that they have that would win them the fight if you went all in. A classic example for this is Fiora W. If you all in a Fiora when she has her W spell up, I can guarantee you that she will kill you. 9 out of 10 times it is borderline impossible to win against her if you are both the same HP and she has her parry up. Now the question is, how do you win versus that? The answer is quite simple. You want her to use her W without you using your W. So whenever she goes in to poke you or goes to last hit a minion, you line up your Q1. They usually don't block your Q1, sometimes they do, and in that case you need to be able to react quickly and dodge it by using your E to the side. If she doesn't block it, you get a free hit. Now you can set up your Q2. In most cases, you have to use your E in combination with your Q2. Make sure to not dash in a straight manner towards her. Dash forward, but with a bit of an angle, so your blade travels towards her, but your body moves to the south or to the north, which will make you dodge her parry. There are maybe a handful of Fiora players that are able to predict this type of dash, and you should be successful with this 99% of the time. If the Fiora for some reason also doesn't block the second Q, then you literally just won a trade and just have to wait and respect until your Q is back up so you can do it all over again. Don't make the mistake most Aatrox players do and go for a Q3 all in. Only use your Q3 if the enemy is surely going to die. If they don't die, then you do not have any damage left and you will be killed. Now let's say she used her W in order to avoid your first or second Q damage. You successfully dodged it with your E and it is now on cooldown. Your next Q and E are going to be up within the next 8 seconds, while Fiora has to wait a whopping 24 seconds for her W to come back. So you got all 3 spells up while she only got 2. And Fiora Q and E is pretty useless if she doesn't have her W to back her up. Now there's 2 things Fiora can do. Number 1, she can respect the fact that you have an advantage on the next trade and give up many minions and then try again with her next W. If this happens, then at least you get a decent amount of time to properly last hit your own minions, take control over the wave, and possibly deny her last hits or maybe even some XP, or your jungler saw her use W and is on his way to gank her. The second thing she can do, which is what happens most of the time, is to try and greet for a minion with her Q, overextend, and get absolutely one-shot by a full rotation combo and basically lose the lane because she doesn't have her parry to defend herself. I know it sounds more easy than it is, but once you got the concept of how to win the lane in your head, all that's left is practicing the mechanical aspect of it. And from my experience, that is not too difficult, and all it takes is a couple games worth of experience on a specific matchup. The coolest thing about this is that you can apply this cooldown turn-based gameplay concept onto literally every top laner. There is no difference between Fiora's parry, Camille's hookshot, Darius's grab, Gnar's jump, Riven's shield dash, or Vladimir's pool. Obviously, these lanes play out differently from each other, but the main goal of making them use an important spell without you using your important spell in order to get an advantage on the next trade stays the same. Another problem, especially for the new Aatrox players, is that sometimes it's very hard to hit your Q sweet spots. Specifically the Q1 sweet spot, since it's the smallest out of all three and hardest to aim. To solve this problem, I got another good concept. Do not try to hit the enemy spontaneously. Use your own minions to guarantee a hit. Let me explain this a bit further. You of course have to pay attention to the enemy minions and you last hitting them. But the same also counts for the enemy laner and your minions. You can predict where the enemy is going to step by looking at your own minions and which one is going to die next. Because that is also the minion the enemy will walk or aim towards, so you can kinda estimate where they're going to stand, which makes your Q much more reliable and accurate. If the enemy is a low range and low utility champion, like Nasus or Kayle, then whenever they walk up to last hit a minion, they literally stun themselves for half a second during their basic attack animation. This is your time window in order to hit your Q1 and maybe set up a bigger trade with a Q2E into passive basic attack combo. Some players will try to predict your offensive E and walk towards you in order to avoid getting crit and kill you in a all-in. Best way to counter that is to just stand still during your Q2 even if the enemy is a bit far away. If they try to dodge it, they will just walk straight into it. This is basically just punishing them for taking a minion they shouldn't have taken because you've got your Q up. The same thing I talked about earlier, where we were the ones that had to respect the enemy. A good player will know that you will do this, bait out your Q and step back from a last hit in order to put your Q on cooldown, forcing you to respect and them getting the advantage in the lane again. The cool thing about this is that from my experience, people don't really do this until Master or higher elo, so Aatrox can get super fun in lower ranks where the enemies just get hit by literally everything after you figured out how to perfectly utilize your Qs in lane. Now in order to maximize your success while trading, let's go over some of Aatrox's combo options. Aatrox has three main combos, one for close-up melee range, one for mid-range, and one for gap closing into long range. Let's start with the melee range combo. Aatrox doesn't like champions that get in his face. Let's take Wukong as an example. If a Wukong jumps on you with his E at level 2, then you are forced to defend yourself while also creating space between you and the Wukong, since you won't win the auto attack battle after you have used all your Qs. So in order to win that trade, you simply Q1 basic attack, Q2 basic attack, then Q3, and right before you crit the Q3, you E back towards your tower so the Wukong still gets knocked up and you create new space at the same time while he is unable to move. This will be your main tool against annoying coin flip players that just like to smash their faces on their keyboards in hopes of stat checking you in the early lane. Champions that do this are something like Wukong, Jax, Tryndamere, Irelia, Kled, Fiora, Pantheon, Renekton, Riven, and Shen. The mid-range combo is the most classic and simple Aatrox combo. It starts with a max range Q1 into an instant W, which will be guaranteed to hit since the enemy is knocked up. Then take a moment to see where the enemy is going to try to escape out of it, and follow up with a Q2 plus E crit. After you hit your Q2, you get a free basic attack before your W pulls them back, and you can finish the combo with the Q3 in the middle. This combo should be used as an all-in with your ultimate, and always has the goal to either kill or force the enemy to take a bad recall. This combo works consistently against all champions. The long range combo is used when an enemy is too far away to get hit by your Q1 plus E combination. It is mostly used while you're chasing someone, and it looks something like this. You E then W very quickly to close a huge gap between you and an enemy. After it hit, the target will be slowed and forced to dodge to either the left or the right. After your W connected, take a small moment to figure out where they will try to walk out of the W. Then line up your Q1 in order to stop them from leaving in that direction. This will proc their pull and you can follow up with a Q2 into the middle. If you have a couple points into your E, then you most likely only need to wait 1 or 2 seconds until you can follow up your Q3 in combination with a new E to secure the sweet spot. This combo is insanely good during mid-game teamfights around mid lane and can help your team make good picks before taking objectives like Drake or Nash. It also works well versus long-range top matchups like Vayne, Lucian, Gnar, Akshan or Ryze. I do have to give you a warning though, League of Legends has many mobile champions and also a lot of champions that run Ghost. So you will experience enemy champions just straight up walking out of your W even if you set up a perfect combo that usually should have pulled them into the middle. Zerilda's Grudge slow does help with that problem a little bit, but Aatrox W has such a bad slow that sometimes it just doesn't work out. Sometimes it do be like that. Don't complain to me, go Flame Riot. 5 seconds. Ah, you cock-sucking, disgusting prostitute, how did that not pull? Another important top lane topic is ganks, both from your and the enemy jungler. Aatrox really likes to leash, since he has a very strong leash with his Qs and passive, and also does not like early ganks from his jungler. I already explained how weak Aatrox is in the early lane, so a jungler would just waste his time trying to gank you in the early levels. Only super cheese champions like Ignite Shaco or Xin Zhao have enough early damage to pull off a gank, but other than that, it's a bad idea to gank your Aatrox early into the lane. Also, pathing towards the top side is a bad idea as well, since Aatrox loses priority versus most matchups, which puts your jungler in danger to being invaded by the enemy top laner. After you leash your jungler, you should also try to figure out where the enemy jungler has started. If the enemy jungler has started bot side, then he will be pathing towards your top lane and will be trying to gank you at around 3 minutes to 3 minutes and 30 seconds. This situation where your jungler is clearing towards your bot lane and the enemy jungler is pathing towards you is called weak side. In this scenario, you need to make sure to not make big mistakes in lane and not get too low, because the enemy jungler will come for you and there is no one that can help you. Strong side obviously is the complete opposite, where the enemy jungler is pathing away and your jungler paths towards you. There are some matchups like Shen, Kayle, Nasus or other weak early champions where Aatrox can and should be strong-sided. In that case, you should ask your jungler to start bot lane in order for you to maximize your lead on those late game scaling champions. In a perfect world, both junglers always path away from top lane and let the two Giga Chads find out who the better player is. Sadly, that doesn't happen often, but when it does, it is a very sweet experience. Now the final and probably most important chapter of this guide is macro gameplay. Macro is hard to explain since every game is different and there is no secret formula on how to play every game perfectly, but I do have some general tips on how to behave on the map after laning phase is over. Advice number 1. Do not, and I repeat, do not run mid lane for no reason and start playing Aram. It's the worst thing you can do and just turns the whole game into a circus. A lot of low elo players forget that as a top laner, their main job is to take care of the side lanes. Roaming and trying to help out mid lane or jungle should only be done if the lane state allows you to. Always make sure to keep your lane pushed before you try to roam and make a play. And if the play doesn't work out or you couldn't catch anyone, then you have to go straight back to the side lane since the enemy backup waves will start pushing towards your base. After fixing the lane state, you can go and try again. The reason you have to do this is because if you actually manage to make a good play and catch someone or win a team fight, then you have minions pushed up against the enemy base, which will allow you to take towers as a team. Even if you are Faker and you ace the enemy team in the late game, it's still useless if you don't have any minions that can take down the tower's reinforced armor so you can actually finish the game. Advice number 2. Another important objective is the Drake. Top laners usually don't participate in the first 2 Drakes since they usually fall before the 15th minute mark, and that's too early for a top laner to roam such long distances. But don't look at the number of Drakes that have fallen, rather look at the time. If no team has taken a single Drake until the 15th to 20th minute, and the enemy top tower has fallen or is about to fall, then you are surely able to move. Don't forget to always make sure to push mid lane before taking both Drake or Nash, for the same reasons I already mentioned earlier. Sometimes you will have a weak game and be forced to give a Drake. In that case, you can play strong side top lane with your jungler, support or mid laner and go for dives and take towers while most of the enemy team is focused on the Drake on the other side of the map. The worst thing you can do as a top laner is to walk to the wrong side lane while your team is sitting in Brazil forced to fight 4v5 because you didn't pay attention to what objective is coming up next and to position yourself accordingly. I also do not recommend flipping Drakes or Barons. Flipping basically means that you're taking objectives even though you know that the enemy jungler is sitting right there waiting for it to be low enough so he can go in for a steal. No one in high elo trusts their jungler to outsmite the enemy. So you as a team should always try to either kill or force the enemy jungler to go base, so you for sure know that the objective is safe to take. Advice number 3. Aatrox is very mobile in the jungle with his E. He can dash through most walls, which makes him move faster and also provides good angles for possible Q setups. Here are some important walls Aatrox can dash through. Before I get to the ending, I do want to say that Aatrox actually might not be your champion. This video is not supposed to be your cheat code on how to climb in League of Legends solo queue. It only serves the purpose of educating you on how Aatrox works, what his strengths and weaknesses are, and to just understanding him a bit better overall. The best way of climbing in League of Legends is finding the champion or the playstyle that gives you the most joy and then perfecting it to the highest level possible. I hope you guys found this guide useful and learned at least one or more new things that will make you improve in your future games. If there was anything that I have missed or didn't explain good enough, then please go ahead and ask me personally during my livestream over at twitch.tv/Nail. If I'm not currently losing my mind on stream, then I will gladly try to help you out. Until then, I'm so happy I finally finished this. Thank you guys very much for watching this video, and I hope you all have a great fucking day. Thank you very much, and peace out.